In this video, I want to talk to you about collaborations and how an idea has kind of grown over time into something distinctly different from its original genesis. This track is called Oplot. It's yet to be released. It will most likely be released at some point during 2022. So this is your first opportunity to hear this brand new track. Now, this is effectively a collaboration between myself and a couple of guys from Canada called Objekt22. And it's relatively early days for those guys in terms of their production career. But they sent me over this track back in March 2021, and there was something about the samples that they were using that I really loved. It really struck a chord in me. And what I decided to do was to take that raw material and just build an entire track around it. So let's just listen to a little bit of the original reference mixdown that they sent to me back in 2021. So what really struck me about that was just this beautiful kind of lyricism of the string lines, and particularly the kind of the cello part. So what I decided to do was to take that as a starting point and then evolve my own track around it. So it wasn't a kind of back and forth collaboration. It was very much me taking these parts. Originally I had this down as a remix, but as the track evolved, there was so much kind of original material that came into it that we ended up agreeing that it would be a collaboration. So the first version of this track was really about focusing on creating the mood and really developing those string themes, recreating them with my own string parts and developing them into more of a kind of rounded track to my ears anyway. And this is how the first version sounded. And it's an interesting mix. I mean, it's a very rough mix, as you can hear, but it's very sort of washed out. The drums themselves don't have a lot of presence. They're very kind of mid-rangey, but you can hear that the genesis of this kind of idea of the string-like lyricism is very much there in this original version. Now, since I created that, I've come back to it on 3 other occasions, and I finally have my version 4 is finally what I would consider to be the definitive version of the track. You can actually see from the screen here that this first version was 7 minutes long, just over 7 minutes long, and then the subsequent versions have been a little bit shorter, and then the final version that I've settled on, the version 4, is the shortest of all of my iterations. And there's been a real value to me in going away and really processing this track, thinking about it, listening to it in different environments. The intention behind it was always to create this lush, dark but lyrical string-like track with beats. And I think in the original version, the beats are very much lost for me. They're very mid-rangey and they're scattered all over the stereo field. So if we just give that another listen. Everything feels like it's very much in the background. There's no real punch to the drums. It's not sort of hitting you in the gut where maybe it should do. So in version 2, which was done a few months later, I believe, this was the sound that I ended up with. Now, structurally speaking, that's pretty full on very early on in the track, and the drums themselves are still very mid-rangey. There's very little of that kind of proper punch that like hits you in the gut. So in a sense, it's quite an exhausting listen, because it's full of mid-range and upper mids, and it's a little bit thrashy on the ear. Let's just listen to something just later on in this version. So for my liking, there's just not enough transient energy going on in there. There's not enough kind of punch. So then I came back and had a third revision of the track, looking to sort of mitigate some of the harshness of those drums and to bring in a bit more clarity and a bit more punch. And around the same time that I was doing this, I was writing some new material which is effectively going to form this collection of work that I'll be releasing in 2022. And I was finding that I was much more drawn to a slightly more sparse production style, and certainly with the drums, looking for something that was much, much cleaner and much more punchy. Now, one of the challenges with that, coming back to this track, is, as you can hear from the first two versions, that the drums feel very, very live. They feel like it's a kind of recording of somebody, in a quite a cavernous studio space. And that was very much built into the original essence of my vision for the track. But as the track has evolved, and as some of the other tunes around it have evolved that I've been creating for this body of work, I've started to become a lot more kind of picky on exactly the sound palette that I'm looking for these tracks. So even though this same lyricism is there across all of these versions, I think as you get down to volume 4 or version 4, you'll find that it tends to be much, much more focused. So let's have a quick listen to some of version 3. And still, with the drums, they are cleaner. There's much more space around them. So each of those drum loops has been really, really, really tightened up. But they still have quite a kind of thrashy feel to them. They're still very middly. They still don't have as much punch as ideally I'd like them to have. So even though the essence of the track is there, I also feel that towards the end of this version of it, it's very epic and it's very kind of washed out, and that kind of epic feel is definitely something that I'm going for with this track. But I really wanted to try and rein in some of that harshness, so that as a listen, it's just tighter and much more focused. So on the final version that I'll play you a bit of now, I rebuilt all of the drums from the ground up, got rid of almost all of the live drums, so it's a much cleaner, much tighter and much punchier sound. And I also went through the processing really, really carefully to make sure that each of the reverbs and delays that's being used is playing a very, very specific role. For me, what I want people to take away from this track is this series of kind of interwoven and quite beautiful melodies that lead you through the track. And I also wanted the segments within the tune to be quite distinct from one another. So we did have, actually on the version 3 here, in fact on the first 3 versions, there was a section somewhere, and let's find version 2, somewhere in the middle here there's a really bonkers section. And basically everything, the idea there is that everything just sort of dissolves and disintegrates and then comes back and is released into this big kind of lush orchestral moment. But if you look at it even as a waveform, it doesn't really deliver on the goal. And the goal, if it is to have this lovely expansive moment where the orchestra comes back in after that drop down, it made a lot more sense to kind of minimize the drop down and set up that expectation for the string breakdown. So with all of those things in mind, we'll just have a very quick listen just to refresh on version 3, and then I'll play you some of the final version. So that is version 3, and this is the final sound that I've gone for with this track. And this is our breakdown section. You can hear there's a lot more punch here to the drums right the way through this version. They're much cleaner, much tighter, much more focused. So you can see that over time this track has hugely evolved from that kind of initial inspiration that I got from Objekt22's original track. But it also goes to show that there is a certain kind of essence to a piece of music. And I believed each time I came back and I did one of these versions that I was preserving that essence somehow. So in my head, the track that I was writing was actually quite different from the track that I was actually making, if that makes any sense. So in my head, I had this vision of this big, lush kind of elegy of string parts and a kind of emotional outpouring. And that emotional outpouring was there from the very first version. But it was just realised in 4 very, very different ways until finally I found the right voice for this musical idea. So I think the takeaway from this, from a production point of view, it's not to always be revising tracks, because sometimes, you know, I'll make a tune and it's correct first time round. Like there's nothing about it that I'd particularly want to change. But sometimes it takes time for the concept and the musical ideas to really find their voice. Sometimes it also takes a piece of feedback, like somebody actually saying to you, well, you know, I like the track, but it's really kind of hard to listen to, or it's quite harsh, or it's quite confrontational. When confrontational wasn't something I was even thinking about when I was creating it. I was just thinking about this lovely kind of immersive journey. So this is Oplot. I hope you've enjoyed this brief production walkthrough, I guess, or analysis of the different stages of the evolution of this track. And I'm just going to play you out with the final kind of section from Oplot, and you'll be hearing a lot more of this track in 2022. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. You can find all of the relevant buttons and notification bells below. It's a big help if you do that. And also check out my website at simonshackleton.org, where you'll find a whole bunch of new blog posts and a whole range of different content, including my Spotify playlists like Emotive Electronica and On Heavy Rotation, which are 2 playlists that I've been kind of building over the last few weeks. Anyhow, this is Oplot. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.